Are you looking for a career to choose, but you're not sure what career to choose? Perhaps you've recently been diagnosed with the INFP personality type. Well, you've come to the right place because in today's video, we're going to talk about my career as an INFP and some advice that I would give to other INFPs who are trying to choose a career for themselves. Now, people who have been watching my YouTube channel for a while may be aware that I've actually been unemployed for the last 2 years and I've actually got no prospects or any hopes or dreams for the future. However, we are going to disregard that particular fact for the rest of this video. Now, my first working experience as an INFP was when I was 16 years old, and I went and did work experience on my grandparents' farm. I didn't tell the school that they were actually my grandparents. I went and pretended they were just some random dairy farm, and that was what I wanted for my future. I wanted to be a dairy farmer 2.5 hours away from my high school. And so even though I was just basically having a holiday at my grandparents' dairy farm and I was just using it as a way to avoid entering the working world in any way, it did end up being a very educational experience. My grandfather was an ESTJ, and he was one of those ESTJs that shoots at random strangers with guns. He was like that kind of guy. He had a good side to him, but he was a bit crazy. And it was interesting having him as a boss, having an ESTJ for a boss, because I would go on to have many ESTJs as bosses for the rest of my life. I don't think I've ever not had an ESTJ boss when I really think about it. And this grandpa of mine, he really put me to work when I was there for the 2 weeks doing work experience. I used to have to wake up early in the morning, and after milking the cows and things like that, he would give me odd tasks like making me clean his pickup truck for hours and hours using a butter knife to get rid of little pebbles from in between the planks. That's one of the tasks he gave me to do. And he just gave me random tasks, which was good because I had to have something to put into my diary, my work experience diary, that I would get marked later at school. And I would do things like driving the tractor for a few hours and just doing farm work. And that was good. That was kind of peaceful in some ways. One of the more interesting tasks that my ESTJ grandpa made me do was to smash all these beer bottles on these boulders, so then we could collect all of these broken pieces of glass, put them in these sacks, and then what we had to do was go and walk out of the farm property to this place where it was basically part of a national park. So what would happen is there were these kids that would get on little dirt bikes and do stunts and stuff. So what he made me do is distribute all these broken pieces of glass and beer bottles and just chuck them into the wildlife area of this national park. And then what we did is we returned to the farmhouse, and then my grandpa would call up the local ranger, I guess it was the ranger, and he would report these kids and say that they've been drinking beer and smashing bottles. And I think that was a very good education for what the working world was like, you know, being deceiving, framing people, and it just sort of warmed me up for a future maybe in a corporate environment or something like that. Now, unfortunately for myself, because I did a philosophy degree at university, my job prospects were pretty low. It wasn't like I wanted to be a philosopher, and there's not many high-paying philosopher roles anyway. I also had a double major, so I had a professional writing degree, but I didn't want to be a journalist either. I wanted to be perhaps a fiction writer or a script writer, but I was also very aware that that was going to be a very difficult life, and given I needed money and I needed to have some independence, I couldn't just focus on being a writer. It just wasn't going to happen. What I really wanted to do was just move out of my dad's place and just get some independence, and I think in my mind, if I could just find a job that I could tolerate and be left alone in, then I would be relatively happy and I could focus on songwriting every day. That's something I was doing in my early 20s. And one of my first jobs I got actually was I applied for a children's newspaper that would be distributed in a certain area of Melbourne. And I went to the job interview and I got the job, but basically I would be providing comics, providing articles for children to read. And that was kind of a good way to be creative and feel like I'm working in a creative field. Unfortunately, I was only getting paid $20 for every comic that I submitted, $20 for every article I'd write. And I didn't know what to write. There was no guidance. I used to write these ridiculous articles for kids like, should you keep a monkey as a pet? And then I would write this 1,000-word thing about why you shouldn't keep a monkey as a pet. What was interesting is I never got any real feedback after the first or second articles. I think they actually gave up on me. They realized I wasn't going to listen to them. So I just kept writing these ridiculous articles about nothing, like the history of ants. Let's just give them that to get $20. And when they heard that I'd done some comics and things like that when I was in university and high school, they wanted me to provide a comic strip. So I created this character called Moral Mouse who would teach kids morals. He was a little mouse, and he would enter a situation in my comics and he would teach kids morals. And even a few years later, when I finally got some feedback from my boss at that student magazine, and they said that Moral Mouse was not appropriate for kids, because at this point I was trying to get fired, I think. So I used to submit these episodes where Moral Mouse was involved in a bit of a murderous subplot, and it was all just getting very film noirish and very scary and not really appropriate for 5-year-old kids who may have been reading the magazine. I just don't understand why it took 3 years for them to finally give me that feedback and say this is getting a little bit too violent. And please keep in mind that some of our readers are as young as 5 years old. And I just didn't want to compromise my artistic integrity. And I said, I actually don't have time to do this anymore. I'm going to focus on my career. Because at this point, I was working as a casual in a share company. And I guess to get back on track, if you're an INFP watching this video, don't work in a share company doing data entry for 2 years. You're going to eventually make a mistake. The ESTJs and the ISTJs in the organization, and even the ENTJs, to be perfectly honest, they're not gonna like you. The only person who might like you is that ISFP girl who's from Indonesia who sits near you. She'll be your only friend for 2 years, and then you'll eventually get fired anyway, and you'll take your money and go on a Europe trip by yourself and read a lot of French existential novels and refuse to work for the next year and a half. Probably. I think partially I might have benefited by much earlier on in my life focusing on work where I had a bit of social interaction. I think it was very healthy. And I think just getting over the shyness that I originally had, I think it was shyness that kept me in these awful jobs in my 20s and 30s. And I just didn't want to talk to people. I thought I would be a blubbering mess if I was on a phone. I don't want to talk to any managers. I don't want to talk to anybody. I just want to be left alone. And I kept that mindset for so long. And I guess the longer you're in it, the more it's hard to get out of it, actually, because your whole brain adapts to this horrible world where you're just, I guess, a robot. And I guess what I really wish I did looking back is what I'm doing right now, which I've gone and done a diploma in library services, and hopefully I'll get a job in a library. And I think I'm going to really enjoy working in libraries, and I've done some placement in a library now, and I get a huge kick out of just helping people find things, just being a sort of pleasant figure. And INFPs are very good at being very patient, having a good relaxed energy about them. Even the toxic INFPs I've met, and there might be some of those toxic INFPs watching, and hey, maybe the INFP that's making this video is also a toxic INFP, but even those ones have actually quite a pleasant aura to them a lot of the time. It's actually just really hard to get rid of that pleasantness of being an INFP and being a pretty good listener, being very patient, being very calm, and a lot of people in different industries really appreciate it, I think, a lot more than the INFP might think. I know it's a bit fake and a bit phony perhaps, but I prefer to tell people, oh, I work as a library technician, and I feel a lot more pride in saying that, I think, well, once I get a job in a library, rather than just saying, oh, I'm just working in the government. Or I never really liked saying that. Some people used to get impressed when I told them I was working in a corporate team in the government, but I was just filled with shame. I'm like, what on earth am I doing here? And I know there's a bit of imposter syndrome that many INFPs feel about things, and it shouldn't be about imposter syndrome. I did feel like an imposter, but it was more that I just did not want to say that that was my career for my life, because I guess unless whatever I did creatively was to take off and then that would become my actual job, and I guess in that case, whatever silly job I'm doing in the government just to make ends meet would not be my thing. I don't know. But I guess it just makes a lot more sense to me to be like, okay, I am still focusing on being a creative person. It's who I am. I can't not be creative, and there's not much I can do about that. But it is nice that I've got a job which is just going to pay the bills, but I quite like it as well. It resonates with me. It seems to work in terms of identity. And then if you can go into work and you can genuinely get a kick out of helping people and being part of the team, and then leave and then go back to your creative pursuits that you're doing, I think that's not such a bad life. So anyway, those are just some tips about how to go about choosing a career as an INFP personality type, coming from myself, an INFP who is nearly 40 and who hasn't had a job for the last 2 years. Let me know in the comments if you've got any thoughts, if you're an INFP or any other personality type, what sort of a career you think is good for yourself or INFPs, and let me know any other random thoughts you've had or thoughts on this video that I've just made. Anyway, until next time, I've been Vondel Pete. Subscribe, and thanks for watching.